All right, hey, my friends. And in this episode, we are going to talk about ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, and how to really use it when it comes to treating OCD and anxiety. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Codde, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And before we dive into this episode, if you could please help us out by liking and subscribing if you're joining us via YouTube, and leaving a comment or review on iTunes or Spotify if you're joining us via podcast. Your support really helps the show, helps it get to more people. So we'd really appreciate if you take a moment to do that. Also, if you're looking for resources and guidance on really the OCD and anxiety recovery process and really walking you through that process, check out the links in the notes. We have some great resources to get you started, or you can head over to restoredminds.com. So I wanted to talk about, I'm going to make a series this week on ACT. So I get a lot of questions about it. I hear a lot of people ask, is this something that you can kind of use instead of ERP? Or a lot of people get interested in ACT, because maybe they find ERP challenging. And I want to kind of explain it in this episode. And then I want to dive into really the ACT Hexaflex and explain each concept and really what we're doing. So, To begin with the first question, what is ACT? Well, ACT is really kind of a framework, and it's really this idea of being able to accept what presently is and, ultimately commit to living your life based on your values, if you really had to kind of just summarize it. And we're going to go more in depth in that, obviously. But ACT is not really, in my opinion, meant to be used out, like instead of ERP. It's really meant to be used in conjunction with it. And ERP obviously is the exposure response prevention. And so when we're talking about ACT, what we're really talking about is the ACT Hexaflex. And there's these kind of 6 core pillars. And the entire goal of ACT is to help you develop psychological flexibility. And that means your ability to essentially navigate moment by moment life in a flexible way, in a way that is you're able to move with the ebbs and flows of life, and not get stuck in the loops and really in the chaos of something like OCD and anxiety. So when we're talking about ACT as a whole, we got to understand that we're using it in conjunction with ERP. It's in many ways like something that's supplementing our work with ERP. And it's important that we're not trying to compartmentalize the two methods or the two frameworks, because they really do overlap. And when you understand that, you're not trying to really choose between the two, you're really understanding how they work and serve together. So when it comes to ACT, there's these 6 real core tenets, and I'm going to make sure I just read them correctly here. But, the first is the attention to the present moment. Then it's committed action, it's values, it's self as context, cognitive diffusion, and acceptance. And so what I want to do is talk about really self as context and diffusion in the first part of this. And then in the next section, I'm going to talk about attention to the present moment and acceptance. And then in the next part, I'm going to talk about committed action and values. And just so you guys know, I want to, for anyone that's Southern California located, I'm actually going to be giving a presentation with another therapist at the OCD SoCal conference. It's on April 6th. And so I'm going to be going more in depth into this. So if this intrigues you, and if you wanted to connect in person, or, if you are in the Southern California area and there's also going to be some other great talks there, just want to let you guys know that I'm going to be speaking at that conference, and we're going to be diving deeper into ACT. So let's start with just the basic kind of premise with self as context and this idea of cognitive diffusion. So in order to be really, achieve psychological flexibility, the first thing that we need to be able to do is diffuse from the mind itself and emotions themselves, so we really got to understand ourselves as something other than the thoughts and emotions that we're experiencing. And this is what self as context, the pillar self as context is really all about. Most of us are caught up initially with the idea of self as content, meaning the mind is saying this thought, or we're having thoughts about this subject, and we're convinced that that is the issue, right? So we're focused on the content, or we're noticing certain emotions in our system. So we might be noticing, again, a lot of fear, anxiety, sadness, depression, guilt, shame, anger, and we falsely identify with that, with the content of that, right? So we go to the idea of I am angry, or I am scared of this content, right? Not realizing that what we really are is the context, where the awareness behind all that. And this is this idea of consciousness, right? In order to be conscious of what the mind is saying, you can't be the mind itself. So when you hear your mind saying something and it's saying, hey, well, what about XYZ? What if this, what this, and really, going into these concepts here. Because the mind is saying that, because you're aware of that, that's what the context is. When you're really understanding self as context, you're the awareness of what the mind is saying. You're not the mind itself. And more specifically, you're definitely not the content of the thoughts happening, right? So we're taking a few steps back from the mind altogether. And then once we understand this idea of self as context, and we understand this idea of consciousness, and we understand this space that's now developing from the mind, we can begin to diffuse, right? Which is really the next aspect of this, and why these two go in conjunction very importantly, is because that diffusion process is really our ability to retract our awareness from the mind, and being able to be aware of the mind, but not get lost in the mind. And it's the same with the emotions, being aware of emotions, but not identifying with them, not getting lost in them, not getting so consumed by them that we essentially lose context. We lose ourself, if you will. And this is this idea of self as context and diffusion, and how they play together, and why they, really all these pillars of ACT need to be working at the same time in order to be successful. But I wanted to explain them individually so we can understand kind of how they all work together. And so it's not like you just pick one aspect of ACT and do this, but it really is, it's important that you understand the premise of each one. So when we understand this idea first of self as context, and then we understand this idea of cognitive diffusion, what we begin to do is notice when our mind is talking, notice when we're experiencing emotions in our system, and then from there, as that happens, we begin to diffuse from it, meaning we're not trying to get rid of it. We're not diffusing the thing that we're noticing. We're not trying to get rid of thoughts or get rid of feelings. We're essentially retracting from it and coming back into a higher state of consciousness, being able to observe the idea that, hey, my mind is going really fast right now. Hey, I'm feeling a lot of energy in my body right now. Or even then, I notice that my mind is, talking and saying all this stuff about this content here, this topic here. Or, hey, I notice my body has a ton of energy kind of right in my solar plex, or right in my chest, or my gut. And as we're moving back from it, we have more space to be able to allow it to process. And then we're going to talk about how to do that here in the next two episodes. And obviously we're going to go in depth in that in the conference. And so make sure to grab your tickets if you haven't already. But yeah, so this first step is really what I wanted to focus this episode on, is just this idea of the first two pillars of ACT in the cognitive diffusion and the self as context pillars, because then we're going to build on this as we go. Okay. So, but with ACT, what we got to understand is there's these 6 main pillars that all work together, right? So self as context, cognitive diffusion, attention in the present moment, acceptance, and then committed action, and then value-based decisions. So in this episode, this was really part 1 of 3, where we're talking about this idea of the first thing we need to understand is this idea of self as context. We have to understand ourselves as something other than thoughts and feelings, and understand that those are temporary things that we are aware of. And by being able to diffuse from them, we're able to have more space to be able to experience them as they are, and ultimately allow them to pass whenever they want to, and to ultimately come and go as they please, realizing that we don't have to make decisions based on these experiences. So hope this was helpful. And again, meet me over in the next episode in part 2. Definitely make sure you check that out, because we're going to be building on everything we talked about here today. So yeah, if you're interested in ACT, again, this series was definitely created for you, because I really want to understand and help you understand how we use this in conjunction with ERP. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and I wish you guys a great week and a great day, and I'll meet you over in part 2 soon. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com, as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.